Ladies and gentlemen, for all of you who watch my channel, the videos I produce, by the way, thank you for being here. You're a great community. I couldn't be doing this without you. But do you ever realize how this channel, actually how your servant empowers you? Not with crazy stuff, not with conspiracy theories as some might like to say about the work that we are doing, but just by simple facts, just by simply looking at the facts which are the metronome marks and just solve them, like the problematic side of them at least, the very fast, ridiculously fast, impossible to attain metronome marks. We just solve them by just, instead of taking one tick, 2 ticks. That's it. You don't need to be a genius for doing that. And by the way, if you're new here to this channel, welcome. You might not yet know that the content that you're about to consume is actually going to give you that same power. My name is Wim Winters, by the way, and we're not only doing stuff like this, tempo reconstruction, trying to find out, actually, we did find out how these old metronome marks really worked, but I do also play the clavichord. Many of you will ask, like, Wim, where is your clavichord on this channel? And I have to say, I hate seeing it getting so little attention, because you all know that the clavichord is so dear to me. But it's also true that it is a little bit in conflict with the content that this channel is focusing on now so much. So I'm actually thinking of opening a new channel solely dedicated to the clavichord. Let me know in the comment section if you would like me doing that. Back to the content of this video. You must feel empowered, because if you just go on YouTube or Google and you type in Beethoven metronome marks, then you get an avalanche of articles, YouTube videos, probably also partly mine, but that will talk about the difficulties or the problematic side of the Hammerklavier Sonata or some other metronome marks. But in general, you will very rarely, if ever, hear people talk about the impossibility of them. And if you talk to people, and people will answer you like, yeah, okay, but all these metronome marks, all this fuss about that, I mean, no, there's no way that you would have these metronome marks in order to solve what? Because these tempi are fine, we can all reach those, and maybe there are a few problematic metronome marks, yes. Whenever you talk to someone like that, just drink a coffee or have a glass of wine and be good friends and just change the subject, because you know that the person you're talking to is not aware enough of what is going on, is not aware enough of the size, the gigantic size of the problem. It's huge. It's not that we just have a handful of metronome marks, we have thousands of metronome marks that are problematic, if not impossible. And if you are really new here and you watch me rambling about this, what is this all about? Just pause the video, take your Opus 299 of Czerny from your shelf or download it and just sit at your piano. Take a metronome app or your metronome and just try the first etude. Well, you have to realize you have to be able to play 14.4 notes per second consecutively. That's it. Second etude, same thing. Third, same thing. Fourth, same thing. Even faster. The fourth is 16 notes. 16 notes per second. And while you're doing that, also realize that what you're doing was actually designed for kind of beginners. So, I don't know what was in the water of Vienna in 1820, 1830, but I mean, miraculous things happened. And by the way, the water in Vienna must not have been that good at that time. If you read Beethoven's letters, poor guy. Anyways, but what you will see when you read stuff is that people just look in one direction. Everybody takes this modern reading as a default position. And that's, of course, I would say, highly problematic. The thing that is missing in all of these studies, when you talk about these metronome marks, then you have to ask the question, like, why are we talking about it? You know it. But from an academic standpoint, it's weird that you do research about something of which you do not define the problem. Tempo reconstruction, metronome understanding starts from, why do we research it? What's the problem? Once you have defined the problem, I mean, the solution is in front of your eyes, so you know you don't need to be a genius. You need to be a little bit of an idiot. to continue with that in this world, in this time. But I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to do that for you, and you're here, so wonderful. Let's dive into this article, which is really fascinating. This is an article originally published by the Staatliches Institut für Musikforschung. I already made a video about it, but they keep changing this article. Like as you can see, or you cannot see it on screen. It's 4 pages here in 2013. This is a screenshot, obviously. And in which there was very interesting research. They actually measured the Hammerklavier Sonata, the first movement, with 45 pianists, and they took an average of tempi, so they eliminated the bars with ritardando and fermate measures. So here you have the average of tempi, and then you will see that none of these pianists actually reaches the 138 of the Hammerklavier Sonata. And that became a research of no less than 51 pages. You see here the same table. The numbers that you see here are devastating. So Schnabel, we're coming back on that, 131. I'm going to show you a part of the lecture of Martin Norton, and then he will actually take down Schnabel himself. I don't need to do that. Korschik, 127. Gieseking, 127. And if you scroll up a little bit here, that's how they describe it. If you view the average tempo of the movement established in this manner, so their way of calculating, we see that very few pianists come close to Beethoven's 138. Arthur Schnabel and at best Michael Korschik and Walter Gieseking. I mean, come close? 127? 126? That's not close to 138. I could accept that 127 is like only 10% below 138 and therefore in the realm of 138 if these people could match 138, but they cannot. Schnabel made the point of the 138 and he doesn't reach 138. And if you've never heard this recording, be prepared for something. But 127 in this context is very far below 138. Then they quote a few of the contemporaries of Beethoven, which is always interesting to do, is actually start from there. But let's see how they do it. And again, no criticism. It's just people are just in this bubble. They just look in one direction. And when people do that for generations, they're not going to listen to this idiot from Belgium and say like, hey, just turn your head 20 degrees and you will see it. It's like, yeah, maybe one day. So Czerny writes about the Hammerklavier. The principal difficulty comes from the tremendously fast and furious tempo given by the author himself, and then in the performance of the melodic but polyphonic passages to be performed strictly legato, in the clean performance of the passages, tensions and leaps, and finally in the endurance that all of this requires. All of the individual difficulties require attentive practice. And the conception of the grand, whole first movement, kept more in the symphony style, develops after repeated performances than after it has been learned, according to the proper amount of time. Anyways, how do they comment on that? So Czerny also thought that the tremendously fast and furious autograph tempo provided extraordinary difficulties. That's what you read in this, but that's not what Czerny writes. Czerny writes the principal difficulty comes from the tremendously fast and furious tempo. He doesn't say like the extraordinary difficulties, he says the principal difficulties. So Czerny said, it's not an easy piece. It needs some attentive practice. And by the way, I've made the point before, especially the people who write in the comment boxes, yeah, but I mean, then everybody can play the Hammerklavier Sonata. No. I really bet 95% of you watching right now cannot play the Hammerklavier Sonata in whole beat. It's extremely difficult. Of course, when you have pianists like Lisitsa or poor Alberto who plays Prokofiev and Rachmaninoff 3, I mean, these people go and they can play the Hammerklavier Sonata in whole beat. But the people that can play Rachmaninoff and Prokofiev, the Lisitsas, they cannot play the Hammerklavier Sonata in 138 because if they could, they would be in this list. So what's the thing? It requires just attentive practice. But it's not extraordinary difficult. That's not what he writes. What Czerny writes, a difficulty is just a tempo. And why is that? Not on itself. is the performance of the melodic but polyphonic passages. You will see that if you play in whole beat 138, and by the way, the recording we have online is too slow in the middle movement. I know that, people comment on that. Alberto is of course going to record the Hammerklavier Sonata again. But you can already see in his version of 2020, I think it was, that what Czerny writes here, the melodic passages become very difficult and then performed strictly legato. And legato, guys, in this sense, is without a pedal. Beethoven indicates, he marks the pedal. Then, of course, in the first early sonatas, you can have a debate about it. And I know that Czerny says that Beethoven also used the pedal in more instances than where he marked. But when you go to the 18th century, there was not yet a practice of indicating pedal. But in this time there was. And so you need attentive practice, just attentive practice for something that's impossible. Anyways, if we go further, then we come here, Ignaz Moscheles, other than Czerny, since Ignaz Moscheles, the metronome mark was considered too high, and this increasingly so. Moscheles recommends 116. Hans van Bülow, Eugène d'Albert, 1902 by the way, Alfredo Casello, 1920, Lamont, 1923, recommended 112, so a little bit below Bülow. Then Bülow comments here, with the metronomization, insofar as it principally affects the character of the principal motive, the editor, so Bülow, finds himself considerably at variance with the statement of Karl Czerny, who in his quality of first and contemporary interpreter of the later pianoforte works of Beethoven deserves to be consulted as an authority. By the way, it's the same thing that Moscheles says. Of course, not altogether an infallible one. Yeah, he needs to make the case for why 138 is, in his opinion, too fast. Czerny's tempo 138, by the way, it's Beethoven's tempo, but whatever, that so little agrees with the ponderous energy of the theme. Remember this. And then here we have Reinecke. Beethoven himself set the tempo of the Allegro at 138, but certainly anyone would ask him if the grand character of the movement would not be better brought out of somewhat of a slower tempo. The broad character. I'm saying to remember that because if you scroll further, you come into the 20th century and then suddenly people are looking at the metronome marks, and the same metronome marks that were totally innocent in the 19th century become highly problematic. And so this is just a selection of that. 1975, this Mr. Kaiser said, the virtual impossibility, the tremendous tension and exertion of the part of the performer is truly a part of the thing itself. Yeah. So Beethoven was sitting there writing one of his greatest sonatas ever. It's unbelievable. But now Beethoven made something as a gift for his Broadwood piano, and he would send it to his student, by the way, Ferdinand Ries, just saying like, yeah, I'm going to have a virtual impossibility. And by the way, what does it mean? The thing is not virtual impossible. The thing becomes impossible, really impossible with the metronome mark. By the way, also sent to Ries. Almost unattainable tempo. You see, that's, yeah, weasel words for like impossible tempo. That forces the riskiest of entries are not a choice in the sonata, but something that Beethoven demands. You go, suffer and die. I don't think so. Charles Rosen then repeats this in 1971 position, and he says like, he argues that it's high time to abandon conceptions of the Hammerklavier Sonata as mammoths or pyramids. The first movement is not majestic, it's not a commemorative work, but it's an explosion of energy. I mean, these people are great researchers, but why do they override the 19th century contemporary subscription? Like, remember Bülow? Remember Reinecke? That feeling, of course, you get immediately in whole beat. And even in 138, it becomes like, it's a alla breve, eighth notes, where Beethoven himself said, like, if you have a notation in long notes, people tend to play it slower, therefore you use it. And then you go to the 20th century, and then people say, like, no, the metronome mark we don't say it's impossible to play, it's just to drive you, to push you for higher tempo, because if you play too slow, the piece becomes actually majestic and grand. Yeah, but we have descriptions of the 19th century describing the piece like that. And then they comment on Andras Schiff, with his lectures, like, in general, since the 1970, the conviction becomes increasingly common that it is virtually impossible to continue to ignore the only existing metronome mark given to a piano sonata by Beethoven. One even encounters now statements from pianists based on whose performances of the Hammerklavier Sonata one would not expect them from. In a conversation with Martin Meyer from 2007, Andras Schiff suggests, quote, that one-sided monumentalizing performances have distorted the true image of the sonata. Again, end of quote. By the way, going against the description of the sonata by Bülow, by Reinecke, by even Moscheles, Schiff recommends that, quote, tempo precisely given by Beethoven in metronome mark numbers, end of quote, as the antidote, and comes to the conclusion, quote, whoever takes the half note at 138 offers himself and the audience the opportunity to explore the dancing, rhythmically charged present of the first movement, end of quote. And then they say here in the article, on his own recording, Schiff plays the first movement at an average tempo of half note 104, which is one of the slowest versions. So, of course, I don't say it, but this is like a destructive criticism. If you go on stage and you say like, yeah, just play the 138, otherwise it becomes too majestic, and you play your own version 1 year before, 104. But that's the conflict, of course, with these people. But then you have Martin Noorduin. He talks in a Ringvorlesung to students in Köln about Beethoven's metronomization. You will hear Arthur Schnabel, and he will also mention 2 other recordings to be at tempo, to make his case for the students like, yeah, all this fuss about the impossible metronome marks, just do it. I mean, let's listen. It's a fragment of, I think, 2 minutes.
Now, furthermore, Beethoven himself was very interested in communicating his ideas around performance practice to the musicians who would play his music, as many scholars have documented now. Now, in addition, the metronome was invented during Beethoven's life, and this was a device that could be used to indicate precisely the number of beats per minute. So it is easy to see why everyone is disinterested in this topic. Beethoven clearly had a particular way of playing in mind and had the ability to express this accurately. Great! So, what's all the debate about? Well, I'll tell you what the problem is. Many of the metronome marks have been criticized for being ridiculously fast, amongst other things. The metronome mark for the opening movement of the Hammerklavier Sonata Opus 106 is probably the most cited example of this. And I have to say that I can sort of see why. Even the great Arthur Schnabel, who recorded it some 90 years ago and who had a pretty good technique, had difficulties tackling this. Let's briefly listen to what he does with the opening, and you'll see what I mean. And here's the first Viennese edition of the piece, and here's how Schnabel tackles it. Particularly if you are used to the pristinely clean recordings that are produced nowadays, Schnabel's attempt to play this piece at the indicated speed sounds like a very capable pianist being hopelessly in over his head. So, to many who listen to performances like this, including some very respected musicologists such as Sir Donald Tovey, they have concluded that there must be something wrong with this metronome mark. Either Beethoven must have somehow broken his metronome, or he must not have used it correctly, or perhaps most straightforwardly, he was simply wrong about what is feasible or musically sensible. Well, in short, there is, by some, a strong urge to explain these inconvenient metronome marks away. Now, before I go on, I do have to mention that there are several much more successful recordings of this particular piece at Beethoven's indicated tempo now. Look, for instance, for Stefan Müller, and perhaps most impressively, I think the South Korean pianist Minkyu Kim, who both of them managed just fine, and the recordings are available on YouTube.
Yeah, recordings are available on YouTube. I will come back on that in a second, but just go back. Not mention this research is problematic, I would say, from this standpoint. Like, what as a researcher, like focusing on tempo reconstruction and particularly metronome marks, shouldn't you be a little bit more precise in labeling the problem? Being like, okay, there has been research that clearly shows that Schnabel was not in tempo, so Schnabel was clearly over his head here. Okay, fine. But Schnabel is not 138 and already playing And I would, if you have time, and just go and check Schnabel's recording, how many mistakes he plays in the first 2 pages. That would be embarrassing. But the other 2 he mentions, we checked here. And then, by the way, this is part of the book, so you get a premiere. We calculated, and I made a video about Stefan Müller's Hammerklavier Sonata in the past. You can check it out. So it was a series on the Hammerklavier Sonata. And yeah, it turns out that it was way too slow. But then we go to this Myung-Ki Kim recordings. I did the same exercise as the Staatliches Institut für Musikforschung on his recording, and he's very impressive on a modern Steinway with the use of a lot of pedal, which is important. You could say like, yeah, but now no, it's 132. It's a touch up above Arthur Schnabel. He plays much less mistakes. The scherzo is at 91%. The adagio, surprise, surprise, the slow movements are obviously going to be working single beat. 81%, 20% below tempo. This is indeed the most impressive performance on this planet, but it's still too slow. On average, 12% below Beethoven's tempi. For which Karl Czerny said, you just need a little bit of attentive practice. And I would even argue, if this guy would practice like 50 years now and then finally comes to the 138, that doesn't solve anything. Then we have thousands of other metronome marks. Then people would say like, yeah, but now, Wim, you're exaggerating. We reached the Hammerklavier Sonata, which you didn't, by the way, and now you give us Czerny. Yeah, you have to step back and say, okay, as a whole, what are we talking about? 8th Symphony, last movement, 17 notes per second. Both if you play the Liszt version or the Czerny version, you'll have to play as a pianist 17 notes per second. Have you any idea how fast it is? And there are repeated notes in the string section. And if you go and see Gardner, he even says like, yeah, this tempo is impossible. But if these people that actually their whole thing is like, we play Beethoven in his metronome marks, they go and make even documentaries. Beautiful documentaries. I wish I would have the budget to do that. And they actually say like, yeah, but that's impossible. And then they would just like smile like, see how brave we are. We go there close. No, you said it's impossible. He says nearly impossible. Of course, it's always like, oh, I didn't say impossible. I said nearly impossible. But yeah, well, why didn't you play 84? And then you listen to the performance, download it, go on a program where you can slow down things and then see what the string section is actually doing with these repeated notes. But yeah, I guess it's also one of Noten's points. Precision of playing was not part of of that time. They didn't want that. Apparently not. I mean, what Schnabel was doing was like give me a quote for that. So guys, you are empowered by this channel because you can just give all of these people the simple answer. And you have a lot of things and facts to back this up. Never go into a discussion when it's possible or not in the sense like, oh, like just have a piano and then try it out. But it doesn't work that slow. Well, that's an opinion. It does. Buy the damn thing. It's 80 euros. It's not cheap. It's 4 years of work. You get 10 CDs, a booklet. I mean, and the next box is coming. We will actually have a tier level. I think we're going to call it like your collection. People are collecting it. You will have 4 of these. All keyboard works. All symphonies. And who knows, by that time, we'll find an orchestra to work with, like for a year, to just learn to play in this way, because it's not easy. Therefore, people say it doesn't work. It's not easy. Before I end, we have a Patreon page, and I want to thank my patrons. They, as I always say, they allow me to record these videos for you. It's now a Monday afternoon. Last one was Friday afternoon. Now it's Monday, but they do allow that. Go and check it out. There's cool stuff there. There are a lot of podcasts actually talking about the same thing. This is also a podcast. Love to go into podcasts. Thank you for checking it out and become part of that community. And then you also have closer access to me and to my team. Whenever you want to ask something, you'll actually get a written reply through email. How cool is that? Guys, thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. That's all I've got for you today. We see each other very soon again. Bye.